I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to answer one question. Is there a faster way to learn 3D modeling? Most artists learning 3D start by modeling a 2D concept design. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, but I wanted to see if there was a more effective way to learn. I'm Nozuki, and I'm a professional 2D concept artist trying to engineer the fastest path to learning 3D from zero. Every episode, I'm testing one piece of the learning process, so you don't have to. Learning 3D encompasses a wide variety of subcomponents, and the difference between a bad sculpt and a great one can be enormous. Building the proper skills take time, and there's rarely a single way to do it. So instead of doing the same exercise most beginners start with, I wanted to test something different. Can copying an existing 3D model be a more effective way to learn, compared to starting from a 2D concept design? In 2D art, it's common to do master copies to improve your understanding of a subject. I've seen 3D artists do studies of other sculpts too, so I wondered if the same idea could be applied here. Instead of theorizing about it, I decided to spend the next few weeks testing this myself. To test this idea, I needed a professional quality model I could learn from. So I began searching for the right model while thinking through the criteria. 3D collectibles were actually my first thought. I could probably download the 3D files online and study from them. There was just one problem. Most 3D collectibles are posed and asymmetrical. These models look so cool, but I'd also have to account for asymmetry on top of everything else I was trying to learn. Anatomy, form, Zbrush, and everything else. That felt like one variable too many. I was starting from nearly zero experience in 3D modeling, and had to learn the program along with the more abstract concepts. Then, it hit me. Video games. What better way to study 3D models than to study existing video games? Models from AAA titles are generally built to incredibly high standards in terms of quality and design. In addition, many of them already come in neutral A poses, removing another variable from the study. If I could get even remotely close to the quality of a studio-level sculpt, it would give me an objective benchmark to measure my own progress against. I narrowed my search. So, I decided to use Eve from Stellar Blade. It was time to find out if this idea actually worked. I started my mannequin with Z-spheres. This was one technique I learned from Michael Pavlovic's Zbrush tutorial series. Was this the best way to start a humanoid sculpt? I wasn't sure. I had heard of artists using Unreal Engine metahumans and other methods, but at this point, I had done enough research for a first model. The best thing I could do now was dive into the actual work. I could always tweak and optimize my workflow later. Right now, I needed to become familiar with the program and its tools, and the only way to do that was by spending more time using them. I blocked out Eve's armature as best I could, constantly rotating the camera to check each angle. Almost immediately, I ran into a technical problem creating the fingers with Z-spheres. The Z-spheres kept getting stuck and wouldn't separate into finger joints. A quick Google search got me back on track. I needed to add mass to the armature. This was my first time using Z-Sketch. At first, it looked promising, but when I converted it into a unified skin, it didn't turn out the way I'd hoped.
Bruh.
Okay, time for plan B. Let's just inflate the armature instead. According to the Zbrush tutorial, this was another method of adding mass to the armature. This approach turned out to be a lot more enjoyable than the previous one. I also decided to separate the hands so I could work with fewer polygons without losing finger detail. What now? Of course, form and anatomy. With the base armature finished, I started blocking in the major forms, trying to match the reference as closely as I could. This is one reason I thought Eve was such a good model to study from. She sits in a nice middle ground between realism and stylization. That meant I could improve my understanding of anatomy while learning the rest of the 3D pipeline. A more stylized character would still have been valuable to study, but I wanted something grounded enough that mistakes in anatomy would be easier to identify. It was time to model the head. I was really excited to get into head sculpting because this is where I thought some of my 2D knowledge might finally transfer. I mentioned earlier I came from a 2D concept art background. Portraits were always one of my favorite things to draw and paint. I'd also spent a lot of time studying head construction, even making an entire tutorial about it. I was excited to bring some of those concepts into an actual 3D space. Would any of that previous knowledge transfer? The eyeline was in the middle of the head. Halfway from the eyes to the chin was the nose. Halfway again was roughly the lips. Those measurements transferred surprisingly well. The difficult part came after. There was one issue I hadn't really accounted for, but it seems so obvious in retrospect. In 2D, artists tend to draw from a handful of ideal angles. We're creating the illusion of 3 dimensions on a flat surface, so a lot of it can be simplified, implied, or even faked. In 3D, I couldn't cheat those angles anymore. I knew the front, side, top, and bottom views well. Now, I needed to understand everything in between. On top of that, I wasn't just learning anatomy, I was also trying to match the likeness of the reference model. There was just a lot to juggle at once. I ended up spending most of the sculpting phase, sculpting and resculpting the head to match the reference. It was time for the dreaded hands. The hands were much harder to sculpt. They had fewer polygons than the face, leaving much less information to work with. And to be honest, my understanding of the hands were also much weaker than my understanding of the head. To help, I pulled up a 3D anatomical model as reference. Learning both 2D and 3D art is difficult without good reference. Finding the right angle to study is often the difference between understanding a form and inventing one. That's one of the few reasons I created Polyposer. It's a 3D anatomy app built specifically to help artists study anatomy and character drawing. It's still early in development, and I'll be adding new features over time. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check it out in the description. With the references in place, it was time to finish the sculpt. As I started nearing the end of this first phase, one question was still left unanswered. Was copying an existing 3D model a more effective way to learn than starting from a 2D concept design? The experiment isn't over yet, and it's something I'll have to continue testing in future episodes. However, I can say this. I learned a tremendous amount from the first 50 hours of copying Eve's sculpt. I became more familiar with Zbrush, developed a better understanding of character proportions, and trained angles of the figure I never really practiced before. But the biggest advantage so far wasn't simply that I learned more. It was that every mistake became immediately visible. Having the models side by side in Zbrush let me clearly see where my forms are off and exactly what needed correction, something that would have been much harder to identify from a 2D concept image alone. So far, things look promising. I'm Nozuki. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.